Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Amy Kopp, Editor-in-Chief of Rails to Trails magazine here at Rails to Trails Conservancy. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar, Taking Care of Our Trails and Parks During the Pandemic and Beyond. This past several weeks, I had the pleasure of interviewing many of our panelists for today about how they've been managing their park space and trail space over the past few months as the COVID-19 pandemic has evolved. And I wanted to say that I'm personally really inspired by the passion and commitment that I've seen in the way they're providing safe space for people to be outside during this difficult time. And I think that this webinar is a really timely and important way to continue this dialogue and promote the sharing of ideas on a broader scale. So RTC, we're really excited to do this. There's been a lot happening in America right now. We saw trail and park use surge very early in the pandemic, and there have been continued spikes, with some managers recording the highest rates of usage that they've ever seen or historically ever seen or ever seen in the history of measuring their trails, which has been interesting. And this is particularly during a time when communities are faced with less capacity and less resources. So there's a lot of challenges. Today, we're going to hear from a panel of outdoor experts and professionals about the creative solutions that they have been exploring and promoting to ensure safe and positive experiences for everyone, and how they're kind of tackling this need to ensure inclusiveness as millions of Americans seek these outdoor spaces out for mental and physical health. So that said, a theme that's really been bubbling to the top is that we all have an important role to play. I think trail managers, trail users, stewards, community leaders to create spaces that are safe and welcoming, especially during the pandemic and in response to recognized injustices to outdoor access. It's critical that we're intentional in our efforts, I think, to ensure that our trails and parks are welcoming and inclusive. So thank you so much again for joining. That said, welcome today's panelists. Thank you. We have with us, I'm going to introduce them real quick. We have with us Mark Barreca, Director of Government and Community Affairs for REI. Joseph Rozak, Chief Operating Officer for Cleveland Metroparks. Hello, Joe. Joe Inslee, Communications Specialist for King County Department of Natural Resources and Parks in Washington. Jean Braha, Executive Director of Rock Creek Conservancy in the greater DC area. And Ruffian Titman, Executive Director of Friends of the Wissahickon in Philadelphia. And Eric Oberg, Midwest Regional Director of Rails to Trails Conservancy. So we're going to kick things off now. Eric, I think we're going to start with you. From the national perspective, can you tell us about the challenges that trail and park managers have been faced with during COVID-19? Tell us more about that and how they are engaging in management of facilities on a broader scale and how COVID's impacting that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. And I'll thank all of our panelists for joining us today as well. This is going very timely and wonderful discussion. So RTC, we've been talking with trail and park manager professionals really from the very beginning of the pandemic. Those initial weeks found many of our partners, really all of our partners, in crisis and triage mode. They're trying to deal with a massive influx of users among an ever-evolving flood of information and latest recommendations for how to permit the safe use of trails and parks. Rails to Trails Conservancy, we were monitoring trail counters from around the country, and we saw a national increase on average of 200% compared to the same time last year. Over the past few weeks, we have rates that are still sustaining 50+% usage compared to the same time last year. Bicycle-specific use on trails that we're monitoring are seeing a 350% increase. So the pressure on these facilities is absolutely unprecedented. In the ensuing weeks and months since the beginning of the pandemic, managers have had to face the reality of working in this new framework with continued restrictions to their ability to provide services they're used to being able to provide. Heavily impacted budgets, staff furloughs, layoffs, hiring freezes, revenue-generating facilities and events that are closed as well as the continuation of social distancing and other health-related rules, have created a very difficult time for trail and park professionals nationwide. Explaining all this to the public, who's grown used to exemplary service and experiences in our parks and on our trails, has proved very difficult. Encouraging behavior like leave no trace or tread lightly, which are very typical for backcountry or wilderness experiences, to suburban and urban park and trail users is a really serious challenge. While the pandemic response has been a new and unexpected challenge that trail managers and trail users are navigating, the need to create safe, welcoming outdoor spaces for all members of our communities is not new. We have seen too many examples for far too long in too many places of our people not feeling welcome, not feeling safe, and not being a part of our trail and park experiences. Right now, social injustice is being called to attention on a national stage. I hope we can set an example and be a cornerstone for building truly inclusive, accessible, welcoming, safe places for everybody in our community. I can tell you over the course of the last couple months, talking with not just this distinguished panel, but people all over the country that are in the trenches working on this. I have a lot of faith and hope that our park and trail professionals have and will continue to rise to the challenge. All of you listening right now, I think, will be inspired by the work that these people are doing. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. I look forward to finding ways to be better. We all have a role in making things better. We all have a role in in making these places special, accessible, and safe for everybody. So with that, Amy, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. I agree. There's been a lot of, I think, really important and critical questions raised and about moving forward. And I think all of the things that you discussed are absolutely vital. So I'm really excited to get into the discussion as well with our panelists, with our other panelists. Joe Rozak, let's go to you. In a recent interview, you mentioned that Cleveland Metroparks recently recorded surges in trail use, and this blows me away, 70% higher than you had ever had recorded historically. And at the same time, you've experienced challenges, including both personnel shortages and supply chain shortages. So tell us more about this and some of the strategies you've been utilizing to ensure trails in the Cleveland area remain open and healthy and active.
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Just to set the stage, Cleveland Metroparks, about 24,000 acre park system, passive recreation park system, about 300 miles of trails, $110 million operating budget. We also have 8 golf courses, 5 nature centers. We have a staff of about 600 full-time, 200 part-time, and anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 seasonals, depending on the year. We also operate the zoo here in Cleveland locally. So just to kind of make sure everybody understands how I'm answering the questions and the perspective that I'm coming from. But yes, the increased usage and the tremendous amount of financial burden that was put on us in the beginning was a very big challenge, especially considering our zoo is still closed to this day. And that's a huge revenue generator over on our end. There was a threat not a threat, but a concern that the governor was going to close our park systems down. This was at the time that the Bay Area and Chicago and New York were having some of their park systems closed due to the gathering that was taking place. And we, pleaded through lobbyists and others to give us a chance to deploy some countermeasures to try to control the crowds, to control how people were using our parks. So we did a couple different things. An awareness campaign. Immediately, we switched all of our social channels to almost exclusively talking about how they use our park and blanketing people with those different types of messages, the CDC guidelines and such, and then increase signage in the parks. Big signs, banners, small signs along our trails. We put them out everywhere that we could just to try to drive home the point that if we don't use these parks properly, we could have to close them down. We limited access to high use areas, which happen to be the most popular areas in our parks, which was really hard for me because we're normally trying to drive people to some of these areas and get more people to experience them. And we were actually starting to limit access in order to keep them open. So we closed certain parking lots, halves of parking lots, closed some of our piers on our lakefront, things that people are drawn to that increase the chance of gathering. There was a lot of imagery being shared with local officials and state officials of gathering taking place in our parks. So people were keenly aware that that wasn't good and it wasn't being very responsive to the environment that COVID-19 brought to us. Then one of the most important things that we did is we started to close roads down to cars, but open them to pedestrians and bicycle traffic, and really encouraged people to go to those areas and stay socially distant and spread out, and still recreate in the park and get a great experience where they felt comfortable being there. And that was a challenge, and not much unlike Eric's introduction in regards to equity and diversity and justice. Cleveland is one of the most segregated cities in the country, very big east-west divide. And what roads did we close? What amenities did we leave open? What bathrooms did we open? Where did we put a porta-john? All of those things had a layer of equity built on top of it that we took very seriously when we're making some of these decisions to make sure that everybody from all parts of the community still had equitable, safe access to our parks, but also was using the parks responsibly.
Thank you. That's great. Jean, let's go to you. When we talked, you shared how important Rock Creek Park and trails have been to the DC region, how eager your volunteers are to get back into the swing of things. What are some of the major obstacles that you are experiencing right now? And tell us about some of the tactics you've been utilizing to help encourage continued stewardship, maybe not if it's not possible in the park per se, but at home, or individual stewardship in the parks that's safe and meaningful during this time.
Thanks. Yes. So Rock Creek Conservancy is a nonprofit organization that partners. We're an official philanthropic and stewardship partner to Rock Creek Park, which is a national park with about 2,000 acres of wilderness in Washington, D.C. We're also a watershed organization. So we work in the 80 square miles of watershed in Washington, D.C. and Montgomery County to protect Rock Creek, which is, as the name suggests, the defining resource of Rock Creek Park. So I think that this moment in time, if you will, has really highlighted the value of parks to our communities as the increased visitation numbers in Rock Creek and all the other places we've heard from has certainly highlighted. And I think particularly as we're all thinking about our health, more people are thinking about the health benefits, both directly to them, but also those community and environmental health benefits, the clean air that our forests afford. So the Conservancy has, for about 15 years now, been engaging volunteers in stewardship of those forests, reducing the impacts of stormwater on the park, as well as removing invasive species directly from the park. During the stay-at-home period in DC, we have not been able to engage volunteers in groups, which has been frustrating for my team, as well as for the volunteers who are really eager to get out and give back to this resource that has meant so much to our community during this time. We also haven't been able to allow our volunteers to organize groups of volunteers, and they do that. Usually we have 2,000 volunteers in April coming out for our extreme cleanup, which removes about 10,000 pounds of litter from Rock Creek. But it's also been a great opportunity for us. One, we've engaged the community in what we call socially distant stewardship. So opportunities for people to take individual actions or with their household unit. So that can be as simple as an individual cleanup, which is grabbing a trash bag and picking up trash, either when you're hiking a trail in the park, or you can do it in your community. It's been a great opportunity to really remind people that what happens outside of the parks is really important to the health and well-being of the park resources themselves. It's a watershed organization that comes naturally to us, but it's been a great teachable moment. And of course, we've been asking people have also been spending a lot of time gardening and working in their yards or on the thinking about the property around their apartment buildings. So it's been a great opportunity to point out that a lot of the invasive plants that we see in the park that are threatening the forest come from outside. So take this moment we have an English ivy pledge. Ivy's easy to identify on private property, to remove it from the trees that you might have responsibility for. And we've been really thrilled with the response that people have had. We still have volunteers that want to get back in the park quickly, and we're working on that as things start to open up but really thrilled that people are willing to help out in that way.
That's great. That's I think it's so powerful to hear ways in which, we can't all do the things we were doing before, and it's important to keep people engaged in any way they can, and the fact that people are still engaged and they still want to stay in this and be with you on this is really inspiring. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Ruffian in the Philadelphia area. I thought this was a really interesting conversation we had. Friends of the Wissahickon is committed, you mentioned, to keeping its trails open during this time to ensure equitable access to green space for residents. And tell us about this and what you're doing and how you've sought to keep park stewardship going virtually during social distance mandates.
Yeah, so that is all true. We are the Park Friends group, so I'm not the primary landowner. That's the Philadelphia Department of Parks and Recreation and our fair city of Philadelphia. The Friends have been stewards of that space for nearly 100 years. We celebrated 95 last year. We have, in that time, gathered a large number of members and friends to work with us in stewardship of the Wissahickon Valley Park, making it both cleaner in a simple way, just to say that all the things we do are similar to what Jean just went through, and whether it's trash cleanup or invasive removal, trail stewardship, and stormwater infiltration, remediation. And I think that one of the things we saw early on as the pandemic was happening was our surrounding counties and national and state parks were being closed, or at least their parking lots were being closed, which means if you can't walk there, you can't go there. The Wissahickon is an extraordinary place in any time. It's a forested gorge of 1,800 acres in one of the country's largest cities, and it has a transformational, like time warp almost quality of when you walk in, you're just taken away. And so we saw early on huge use, more in line with our peak summertime in kind of some gray weather in March. And lots of calls, like, when are you going to start advocating to close, and how are we going to keep people away? And that wasn't a position our organization was going to take. It wasn't where our city was going. We were keeping our green spaces open. It's something we take pride in Philadelphia, the amount of acres that are out there. And I think our messaging was really on personal responsibility and safety. And within our own organization, following all those guidelines. So we did suspend our large groups and really focused on messaging of what people could do when they were out on their own health allowed walks in the park, and report that information back to us. And now as we look towards opening up, we have a phased plan for allowing people to, or structuring what people might do as kind of self-guided in the in-person sense work in the park. But again, we're here in the city. So many people, this is really their backyard, their garden, their oasis every day, not just in these COVID times. So to take that away would have been just devastating, I think.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I think what we're seeing across the country is it's so hard. It's so hard. There's increased trail use. People are really, trails are front and center. Parks are front and center also, and allowing people to be out and get that physical activity and mental respite. But it's just such a challenge, and it's so important to keep these places open. But it's so important too that we make sure that they're being used safely, and so there's there's constant challenges to do that. Thank you for sharing. Joe Inslee, let's move to you. In this time when access to the outdoors is a commodity in many communities, from your perspective as a communications professional, what's important for us to keep in mind with regard to inclusiveness in the outdoors, especially during a time when we're seeing so many new users visiting trails and outdoor public spaces?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Amy. So, big topic. I would just quickly respond to this and put things in two buckets. Number one, putting out material. I think in times like this, it is very important that all of our outreach materials from social media, website, images, that we are featuring things that show these parks and these trails are for all community members. And I just want to say that I think it's now more important than ever to make sure, go in and think about, what's your featured image on your website? Think about your brochures and put that lens on it. And I would also advocate not only, thinking about the full ESJ spectrum, also the range of users, ADA access, people with limited movement. Think about that lens as well. And so, again, following that trend of putting materials out, also making sure you have the appropriate translations. For COVID, all of us here are going to be talking about signage probably at some point. Making sure, looking at where you're putting those signs and what languages are local to that region and doing your best to try to match those users with the information there. So they're seeing and understanding, especially for a place like us where we had to close all of our parks. Now they're back open. We want to make sure people see in their familiar language that we're back open and the rules we're asking them to try to follow. Secondly, just super quick, when you're trying to seek information, especially about trail design, park planning, all those things, just do your best to try to engage new user groups and not just your familiar, weekend warrior bike riders or average trail walkers. And how do you change the way you approach that type of engagement? What we've been trying to do in King County, making sure we go to community groups and compensate for their time when they do outreach to their network. That is really important. These community groups are getting asked by a lot of different government agencies to get their peers' input. So we really try our best to make sure we compensate for their time and develop contracts and things like that. So when we're reaching out for new users, we're doing it in a way that rewards the valuable time they're putting in.
Thank you, Joe. Engaging users and safe and responsible recreation, ensuring that everyone is included, that everyone's invited, that everyone's engaged. These are really, really important right now, more than ever. And staying on this, we'll go to Mark from REI. Mark, REI and the Outdoor Alliance are helping to lead the national coalition to encourage responsible recreation during the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired these efforts?
So, these are unprecedented times, obviously, and there's some good in the midst of a lot of the bad. And, some of the good is that so many people are relishing time outdoors, either more intensively than they have before or as a new venture. They're appreciating that time in nature is good for their heart, their soul. But, like in any walk outdoors or indoors now, we have to be concerned about whether we're improving ourselves or potentially creating risk that we spread the pandemic. And so we were asked, my teammate and I in the community outreach space, how do we simplify this for people? We've never experienced a pandemic before. How do you, for a person in their ordinary walk of life, how do you summarize the ABCs of getting outdoors and not spreading or exacerbating the pandemic? And so we latched onto that challenge, and we looked across the landscape, and so many different agencies, so many different organizations are working on best practices for recreating responsibly or mitigating risk of propagating the virus. But the messaging is ever so slightly off. And so what we aspire to do is we aspire to embrace, all stakeholders nationally, state by state, and really try to drive towards a shared set of norms and a shared way of articulating those norms. So it's easy for the park goer to remember the A, B's, and C's of recreating safely. Or in our case, the 6 things. What are the 6 basics of recreating responsibly and safely? Plan ahead. Think about where you're going. Make sure you've packed your essentials. Really, in this time, stay local. Be respectful of local risks and local needs. That's all before you go. And then once you're on site, engage in physical distancing. Use your mask when you're within 6 feet of somebody else. Leave no trace, and avoid unnecessary risk. So, those are 6 things, but people, they don't naturally remember 6 things easily. And so the whole point of the movement is to try to simplify these 6 things, and then collectively go amplify them. This is a journey. We're just a couple weeks into pushing out this content. And it's an evolving space, obviously. And so we're both broadening the coalition effort and taking input on how to perhaps develop a version 1.1 of this. But the ultimate hope is that by pulling our diverse, diffuse outdoor community together, we can actually land on a shared way of articulating best practices, so that we maximize the chance that park goers actually adhere to those best practices. So far, it's very good. We've got over 300 organizations at both the local and the national level saying they want to join the effort. And hopefully over the course of the summer, we go from 300 to 900 to several thousand. And once we're all harmonizing on the same hymn here, there's a great chance that will affect behavioral change.
Thank you so much, Mark. This is such an amazing initiative, I think, during this time, and very much needed in the United States. So this is really exciting. Joseph Rozak, let's go to you. One of the challenges right now, as we seek to encourage responsible recreation and facility use, is that organizations like Cleveland Metroparks have been forced to serve more with less resources. Cleveland Metroparks has talked about that recently publicly. Tell us more about some of your outside-the-box strategies that you had mentioned to me to fill staffing holes and move resources around across facilities.
Yeah, we at the Metroparks at an administrative level, when we looked at the budget and the implications of it, our biggest cost and resources is staff. So we knew to save money, we had to deal with it from a staffing perspective. And our seasonal staff was one of those areas where we knew we really had to limit almost down to no seasonals to get through the year. And it was very challenging. We wanted to think of the human side of it, and we didn't want to have to affect staff's personal lives and family lives and have them worry about how they're going to pay rent if we really didn't have to. So we creatively looked at areas like our golf courses. A lot of older staff were fearful of coming back to work at the time because of the pandemic, and the older population is predominantly affected by COVID-19. So we used staff from some of our closed facilities, our nature centers, and moved them to golf courses. We took part-time accountants and had them out planting flower beds in lieu of some of those seasonals that we were going to have to bring on. So we really tried to move staff around creatively to still get as much done as we possibly can without taking on those costs of increased seasonal staff. And we also moved materials around. We took a system-wide inventory of aggregate for berming our roads, and staff in different areas of parks normally had their own budget and they used to take care of it. But now we had to truck it from one area to another, which, a little bit of labor went into that. But ultimately, we didn't have to buy any new aggregate in areas, and we were able to keep our roads bermed, and some of these areas kept up. So limiting the amount of furloughs and things that we had to apply to staff by using them in other places allowed people to stay employed and still get more done for the community that was using our parks. You're muted, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Ruffian, in our recent Trailblock article on maintenance, you're quoted as saying, and I love this, we won't be a lead indicator on opening by trying to jump in early. We'll be a trailing indicator because once we return to the field, we want to be able to stay, and that means keeping safety a top priority. Can you tell us about your careful rollout plan for reintegrating volunteer stewardship as things slowly open back up?
Right. So I mentioned before that we've just been asking people to report in on what they're doing. As we target, hopefully, July 1st for coordinated action, we will have a schedule of activities folks can sign up for a few days in advance, watch a training video, pick up supplies, and go out into the field to a designated location to do their task and report back on it. And we've phased it fairly carefully with, suggested sizes of groups, whether it's, working only with folks in your household. Although we do recognize that many people are riding out this quarantine alone in their house. So, really just being focused on whether it's your quarantine bubble or it's your whatever group that you're feeling like the risk reward ratio is for your comfort level, and having personal responsibility for your person that is you when you're out there. So we'll have, I think I'm running over a little bit now, but that schedule starts July 1. It'll be on our website with registration opportunities, training videos, and tasks that volunteers can sign up for. And those will be focused primarily first we have a large group of 100 plus trained regular volunteers. I
have a frozen screen. Sorry, everyone. I think I had some technical difficulties there. My apologies. So thank you so much, Ruffian. Staying really on this topic, Jean, you've talked about how your stream team leaders and weed warriors, I love that, are helping to serve as local ambassadors to help promote your stewardship, individual and at home, as well as responsible recreation during this time. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, thanks. And it is very important to have a catchy name, as the Recreate Responsibly hashtag, I think, demonstrates carefully. Our stream team leaders and weed warriors are volunteers who often engage other volunteers in service. And they're often some of our most passionate advocates and supporters of the park and the work that we do there. So we are equipping them with the very easy to use toolkit that REI and others have created for around Recreate Responsibly. But we also plan to share with them some specific ways that they can, as they're talking to whether it's their neighbors or someone they pass on the trail, engage in a really productive way. We haven't started this yet. We had started planning that. And one of the things that's important for our park is keeping dogs on leash. It's a way to reduce both impacts to habitat, but also to stormwater pollution issues with the pet waste that goes unscooped. And of course, the incident in Central Park that could have ended very differently, started with keeping dogs on leash. So we want to be sure that we are protecting our volunteers and also giving them the tools that they need to engage with people productively, but in a way that's respectful of everybody. So
absolutely. Soon. That's great. That's really critical and important right now. Thank you, Jean. Joe Inslee, you mentioned that following reopening in early May, you noticed a clear need. So this is kind of staying on topic for consistent communication, countywide and statewide, to engage trail users in safe and responsible use. And can you talk about that and the strategies that you have adopted to try and help push that along positively?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. This is kind of a micro version of the larger Recreate Responsibility Coalition that came up. So this is King County, over 175 miles of trails we have, lots of cities, big challenge of how do you set up expectations for the user who doesn't know who owns the park. So when they come to a park, no matter where they go, they are expected to try to follow the same rules for safely recreating. So again, big hats off to REI and others who led that issue. So what we did is take messages that work and repeat them consistently throughout all your parks. So for instance, keep it moving. This crowded parks leads to closed parks. This started in Seattle and then basically just spread. We took it, carried the message, put it out in a lot of places. If you move through the next couple slides, please. And it's also important to remember, take the message that speaks to the user and put it at the site. These signs don't have to include every single message, but again, you're just trying to consistently tell them what to expect at that site. So here you see that was a hiking, this is a regional trail, and we're also combining good trail etiquette with what works well for COVID safety. For instance, give notice when passing, create space between the user, that's 6 feet of separation. It's good to emphasize good trail etiquette when they combine with COVID safety issues as well. So that's what we were trying to push on these signs. Next slide. So again, and it's also really important to create messages and package them up for user groups, mountain bike groups, or road runners, and package them up in a way that they can take and spread on their website, their social media, which is engaging. So we've had fantastic engagement on motion graphics and social media. This is just one quick slide of a 30-second motion graphic we put together that ties together all these threads of good trail etiquette combined with COVID best practices. Next slide. And the other big thing is setting along the idea of users being able to find information consistently. We looked at how information was being shared and tried to replicate it. So on the left, this is the Seattle Parks website. Users can see what's open. We did the exact same thing because we heard from user groups, this is what they want. They want to see a list and they want to see things clearly. So the idea is we encourage you, if you're hearing from user groups, hey, this what works really well on this website, go to that website and try to recreate it if you can, because it's worked really well for us. Next slide. Okay, that's not mine. I'm done. So thanks.
Well, thank you. I think we can go back to that. Actually, I want to thank you, Joe, because I think you've just summed up what everyone on the panel has been talking about today, and really important points that all come together. And that's that at least a big takeaway is that it's up to all of us, and that's trail users, people who want to be volunteers, trail stewards, managers, advocates, everyone to really come together and understand that it's our responsibility to make sure that everyone has a safe and very positive experience out on the trail, and that these trails stay open and that we maintain them as well as we can during this really difficult time where organizations are faced with a lot of challenges. And so I love that the responsibility is on all of us. So Mark, I think that's a really great opportunity. Let's close. If you could maybe just go over the six tips one more time of recreating responsibly, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to. And, I couldn't agree more with what Joe said in terms of repetition and rearticulation and form factor. We're, as an outdoor community, how diffuse we are can sometimes be a strength, but it also can be a challenge because we run the risk of fragmented messaging. And so, to the extent we can cohere as a community around the idea that you should know where you're going, know where the trail is open, bring your essentials, and primarily now stay close to home. And then once on site, physically distance, avoid risk, and leave no trace. I think, repetition here and slight variance will lead to behavioral change. I just want to wrap or maybe make a final comment picking up on some of the themes that others have expressed. In some respects, these Recreate Responsibly principles are like, brushing your teeth before you go to bed. They're just good hygiene. But I think we all recognize that, the civil justice, the civil liberties questions around time outdoors are also front and center now. And as we go about this task of welcoming folks into the outdoors in a safe and healthy way, we as fomenters of this effort, I think also owe it to all Americans, in particular Americans from traditionally disadvantaged communities, the Black community, to make sure that they feel welcome in the outdoors, and that yes, we should all brush our teeth before we go to bed, but we should all welcome each other into the outdoors as well.
Thank you so much for those words, Mark. Right now, it's in America. There's with everything happening, I think it's one of the most important takeaways of the day is that trails are. It's so important that we all feel safe out there. That we're ensuring safe experiences and good experiences and inclusive experiences for all trail users across the United States and particularly for the Black community and minority communities. And we just really need to take that responsibility. All of us should take that responsibility. And so I think that's very inspiring words to end on. I thank you, everyone who joined us for the live broadcast. It was awesome to have you all with us. Thanks to our panelists too, REI, Cleveland Metroparks, King County Department of Natural Resources and Parks, Rock Creek Conservancy, Friends of the Wissahickon. Thank you all so much. I just also wanted to remind everyone that if you want more resources on safe trail use during this time, you can go to rails2trails.org COVID-19. There are a lot of blogs and other resources there for everyone to peruse. So thank you. And I think we are going to go to our Q&A now.
Creating welcoming spaces. I think everybody's going to agree how critical this is. I hesitate to say how critical it is right now. It's been critical forever, and it's going to be critical for a long time until we make it until it's really part of our culture. But I'd just like to open it to the panelists, really. Would anyone like to share some thoughts on how do we really create and manage safe, welcoming spaces for everybody? How can we be better about this? And I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. If any of our panelists would like to say a few words on that, please feel free.
I mean, I'll jump in first. I think, here in Cleveland, the way Cleveland Metroparks has been approaching it and will continue to approach it is from a community standpoint. Metroparks is a piece of the puzzle that will allow our open spaces and our green spaces to be more open and acceptable. So I think a concerted effort to engage local nonprofits, local governments, and talk about these issues with parks, recreation, and open spaces is vitally important. I think if you would have asked me this question 6 years ago, I would have talked about our HR department. I would have talked about, things internally. And I think what we're talking about are systemic community issues that talk healthcare, education across the board, from a justice standpoint and policing that's now highlighted, obviously. There are multiple layers of avenues and opportunities for improvement that we can all work together with our community partners. So at the highest of levels, I think that's something that we should all think about a little bit more than just thinking about what we personally or what our agency can do. It's what can our agency do with another group of community leaders to increase access and equitable opportunities.
Yeah, I'll second that, Joe. I appreciate the comments. I think parks are places that historically have been created for people to come together, and they do represent a lot of our shared values, so have a lot of opportunity. I do think that there's, the first step is just talking about it and recognizing some of the areas where we have for growth and opportunity and some of the questions that we still have as organizations. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to my colleagues and panelists about this and in other forums as we, forge partnerships with other organizations that can help broker some of those relationships, recognizing that both the outdoors community and the conservation field historically have been less inclusive than we would like to see them be in the future.
I think it's on all of us to open up the channels that we have and the access to these, networks of constituents to amplify the voices of our Black Americans that are using spaces and not hide those stories. It's, as we've heard a lot, representation matters. And so making sure that we're showing kids that, everyone working in this field isn't white. And then going beyond that to finding solutions to a lot of those problems or what have been highlighted as problems or issues in our public spaces that aren't just a police solution. Obviously, there are emergency situations where people are in danger physically, and there's a role for police in situations, but that, not everything needs to go to threat level red as a starting point. And how do we build that culture of graciousness and kindness and understanding in our spaces, I think, is work we all have to do. It's not, it doesn't happen overnight, but it also doesn't happen if we never start.
Definitely. I wanted to actually, guys, I want to jump in because this is a really interesting question that was posed. Let's see, Joe Inslee, it might be good to start with you on this one, but I want to, any panelists that have input, please let us know. The question is, I see a lot of things being geared toward those who are new to trails, but a lot of tensions I've been seeing while on trails are from those who have been using them and are not happy with how crowded they are now. Are there resources being put out for that?
Yeah, really good question. I think, people have concerns, existing trail users, we hear this a lot, safety concerns, new trail users, not abiding best practices, et cetera. But it's also really good to continue engaging those existing trail users. So 3 things I would say. Number 1, we've been asking those existing trail users to just think about timing in 2 ways. Shorten their stay to allow more time for new users to come. Secondly, look at what time you're going to this park or trail. Think about changing it. Seattle Parks was doing a really cool thing. They were saying, go to Google, look at what time this park is busy, long summer days. If your park hours allow it, think about going outside those times. Again, this is a call to action to saying, help us, help our overburdened staff, go at a different time, carry out your trash, do all those great things. Third thing I would say, we always say we love knowing that you come to this park every day, but you know what? Maybe it's a time to try a new park that's still maybe local. Look, people, we have so many parks that we got a comment just this week on Facebook saying, I didn't know this other regional park was right around the corner, as a couple miles. It's always good to remind people, here's a resource, look at this park finder, try a new park. We encourage you to do that.
I would just second the notion that we need to be better at load balancing across the park assets. Places get overused because they're popular, and by word of mouth, people, when they ask where to go, they're told to go to the popular place. So the popular place, is overrun and faces maintenance issues. The less popular places have their own maintenance issues as a result of disuse. And so with technology, hopefully over the course of the not too distant future and with collaboration, hopefully collectively we're able to use this moment in time to affect some better load balancing, which will serve everybody's interests. It'll be win-win-win. Thank you.
I agree. The idea of load balance within our park and trail system is an interesting one, and going to be a continued challenge, but hopefully something that we get better at that will serve us well in the years to come. I'm going to throw another question out here, and this is more, well, I don't want to say more, on the operations side. We've got a trail manager here saying that they're still having volunteers working solely or in family groups to clear down trees, remove and replace broken benches, things like that. But they want to hear a little bit of advice or thoughts on when you think it's going to be possible to put volunteer groups together again to go out and do work. I'm assuming not family units, not quarantine bubbles, but when and how do you see putting that back together?
I can speak to the programs that Rock Creek Conservancy is operating. We obviously follow the guidance from our park partners and the operations in their park, as well as local and federal guidance. And it will vary, I suppose, in terms of the numbers and dates based on where you are and what conditions allow. I think it also really depends on what your volunteers are doing. We do a lot of invasive plant management as group volunteer events, but that is virtually impossible to do without getting within 6 feet of someone else, because you need to be able to get down on the ground and look at a plant together. So that's something that we imagine will come much later in a progression. We are, certainly starting to do volunteer events that allow up to 10 people, but we're also thinking about how we reduce sharing of tools. It's really hard right now to purchase the disinfectant that we need to keep the tools safe between uses, and are thinking about that as well as a variable. It's frustrating.
I think it's really hard to say that on this date, this is when we're going to do something. We need to, and it's also, I think the reality is we're not going to be going back to the way we were doing things for a while. I mean, we were doing 300-person organized volunteer days at 10 different sites with lots of crew leaders and people all packed in together and a big picnic and lots of social activities. And I don't think that's where we're headed for a while now. I think it's really a time for planning and clear scheduling and using the resources that are out there to train people virtually, schedule them virtually, and then see how it is in each region. We're all kind of in different phases of the pandemic, and even the understanding of what the implications of it are change all the time. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think in the beginning we were putting dates on things like closed until this date, and then we'd add a month, and now it's like indefinitely. So a lot of our larger volunteer groups, Key Bank and the Cleveland Clinic, those big 300-person events, we just said call us next March, and if the world allows it to happen sooner, we'll call them, and I'm sure we could put something together. But Cleveland, we're limiting ourselves to trail volunteers working socially distanced out on a long trail system, helping, bench in a new set of trails, or helping clean up a trail, or small litter pickups along river corridors where they can spread out in a wide area, or painting certain fence areas if 2 to 5 people spread out to bring your own tools. So we're doing some volunteer things, but it's extremely limited. We don't have any notions of the 300-person larger volunteer events happening until next summer.
Yeah, ever-changing landscape. There's one theme to everybody, every panelist, and probably everyone listening to our personal and professional lives. It's ever-changing, and we need to be nimble. I'm going to ask one last question. And in your experiences, how are your organizations navigating budgets? With state resources down, local resources down, parks and trails maybe not charging user fees. I mentioned this in my opening comments. Many revenue-generating events and facilities closed. You're not receiving these revenues from fee-based activities. What are you doing to deal with that? This person also asked about federal advocacy to help, and I guess I'll just indicate that. Rails to Trails, we are working very hard at the federal level as well as at the state level in a lot of places, trying to ensure that if there are going to be resources available, that certainly our park and trail partners have access to those resources. So you can see more of that at railstotrails.org/trailstransform. Take a peek there. But let me shift that question to the panelists. The budget constraints. How are you dealing with this, and any advice or sage words of wisdom for some of our fellow managers on the call?
I mean, I mentioned it in my question. I mean, we've made 650 staff have been affected by furloughs to some extent. I mean, we've had to make very tough, sad, hard decisions to set ourselves up to get through this budget year. And, unfortunately, I think we're all going through that. All local governments are struggling with that. I mean, we're exploring opportunities from FEMA and locally here at our state level for reimbursement for some COVID-related expenses that will help. But it's not going to offset, the zoo being closed. But we've also gotten creative. We've recently, for the past couple of weeks, we've had a drive-through zoo where we've allowed the general public to drive through our zoo and see some of the animals from their car. And we did a little scavenger hunt in the zoo, and we charged a per rate, and everyone stayed in their car and drove through the zoo. And our zoo is not made to drive through. So we got a little creative, and the public responded great to it. I think anything that you can give people a place to show up somewhere on time, families are all about it. That's what I learned. First, is this really going to work? Are people going to think it's cheesy? Sold out immediately. We crashed our website. Our IT people were going crazy. So I think if you can be creative and allow people to try something and do something to feel normal again, the response is going to be overwhelming. So if there are opportunities to be creative, and that's generated, several $100,000 that wouldn't have been there if the staff didn't challenge themselves to what can we do within the parameters that have been given to us by the governor. And it's worked out well, and it's not going to solve our financial issues, but the community responded well, is much happier with us as an agency for trying something new. So I think trying something new, the public has responded overwhelmingly positive. Over social media channels and calls and emails. They're just happy we're trying something as opposed to saying, close, everybody stay home.
Thank you again, panelists. This has just been a great discussion. There's been a lot of questions, I think, posed, and a lot of really creative solutions also. And we really just thank you so much for your insights and for your expertise and for being willing to share what you're doing in your own community. So thank you again. And we just want to say goodbye and thank you to everyone who joined us for the Q&A.